One of the things that I realized early on as an entrepreneur is I listen to everybody, but I don't take advice from everybody. So I'll hear what people have to say. I'll listen to what they have to say. I'll try to understand where they're coming from. But I got to the point where now, unless one, you have a level of expertise in a certain area, or two, you are invested in the business itself in a demonstrated way, then I can't take your advice. You either have to be invested or an expert, or I'll just listen to understand that, hey, there are people out there that might think this way. And I think that the hardest part that ends up happening a lot of times, and then we'll start to wrap up the conversation. I think it's very easy for people to have Twitter fingers, right? Like, meaning that as people, when you're an entrepreneur, there's so much that you have to do, especially when you're a Black entrepreneur. When we don't necessarily have any mentors, right, per se. I can say that I have a few advocates for me. I could say that I have a few sponsors, right? So I have people that will like cheer for me. I have people that will talk positively about me. I have people that if I ask very pointed questions, like resources, that they'll give me very pointed answers. But we don't have like mentors in this game. A lot of us don't have like somebody that can take us through it, and people who are maybe like sharp, willing, determined. We end up having to make a lot of mistakes on our own. So there's a lot that you have to overcome as a Black owned, as a Black entrepreneur. You have to overcome a huge knowledge gap. You have to do a lot by yourself. There's stats talking about how many Black owned businesses are operating independently. You lose sleep. You risk a certain amount of money that other people wouldn't be willing to risk, right? On doing something. A lot of people want to start a business, but they won't take the risk that's involved. There's a lot of money that we could have spent on the house, right? Like there's money that we could have spent on the roof or whatever it is, but it's like, no, like you start to make certain sacrifices when you're an entrepreneur. There's imposter syndrome that you have to overcome. You develop this thing and then you have to struggle with yourself to be like, well, why is mine so good? And you have to actually convince yourself that what you're doing is actually worth it. There's fear, there's sweat, there's just so many things emotionally, financially, physically that entrepreneurs go through that can literally be ruined, like where their intentions are pure. They just want to grow their business and make it sustainable and help build generational wealth and usually give back to the community, because Richard Ludennis, he ended up acquiring Essence, and there's a much bigger picture to this, right? Which I'm sure I would love to have a conversation with him, because I know that there's like, I can only imagine what he's thinking down the road, that people that are just, behind their phones tweeting something
that, because I know, I think it was Tamika who had mentioned that he had acquired Essence. It's beyond that though, because yes, he did acquire Essence and brought it back to Black ownership, but he also acquired the Villa Luaro, which we had a question about in the first season, Madam C.J. Walker's mansion, where other people don't know the background, but like she used to host civil rights meetings there, like really prominent leaders. It's a very significant space. And I think that it was his decision to acquire that space is a very significant, because he also said he was going to do workshops and things like that, helping other Black brands and entrepreneurs get off the ground there. Like, so him in the process of doing that, it was a very, not only thoughtful, but significant step in doing that. And I feel like it meant way more than just like, oh, he owns brands because he has some money. Like, he's making very intentional moves that I think are very important for people to keep in mind. But that's neither here nor there.
That's a great example. And it just shows that like people who are not invested in the process, it's very easy for us to just like, oh, let me take to social media and reshare this thing that's baseless, right?
I don't want to cut you off, but we had talked about this before, and I want you to touch on this, because we talked about the idea of the amount of damage, right? Like how long it takes for somebody to build a brand, and how quickly, especially as Black people and Black Twitter and all these things, like how quickly we can damage that brand. And I wanted you to touch on that because I felt like that's a big piece.
Well, you just touched on it, and that's a great point, because when you think about the time horizon, right? Being very meticulous. And I'm refraining from talking about our business practices in this specifically, because I'm sure at some point we will. But when you think about like how long it takes these people, the grind, how like the hours, like even myself, there was a period when it was like for months and months, I was going like 21-3, and you can attest to that. Like I was going 21-3, no sleep, just like literally figuring out how can I get 15 minutes, right? And then there's like, I don't want to make it about like us, but in school for my MBA, there's the whole fitness thing, there's the business, then there's the day job because we still have to fund the business. So there's all these sacrifices, and that's just us, right? There's a bunch that you're doing, there's a bunch that I'm doing. Like you literally had to develop like 700 questions for like so much work that goes into this stuff. I think about all these other businesses, like there are people who are taking out money from their 401ks, taking a second mortgage out on their house, doing whatever, right? Like literally like living on peanut butter and jelly and Spam or whatever the struggle meals are. Like people are figuring this thing out, and over the course of years and years, and figuring out how to make it make sense. And then for just somebody to go to social media and just like deliver something that may be partially true in theory, or for people to start sharing a headline that isn't really founded on any legitimate information, and you can destroy your brand. Because now there's a few things that happen. Either one, that brand, like you may have sponsors that disassociate from them or whatever it is, because now it's like, oh, well, we don't want to associate with you anymore. Or that brand has to spend hundreds of thousands, if not millions upon millions of dollars in marketing and PR to restore their image that was damaged by Black people doing it to ourselves, Black people doing it to other Black people that are trying to elevate themselves. And this is not like a Black on Black discussion, right? This is like Black for Black discussion. There's a huge difference. So this is like, we gotta be for us for real.
I think that the response, you know how I feel about cancel culture. Even back then, I was not a fan. But I think it goes back to the damage. And I think that's part of it. Like, I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to be complicit in tearing down somebody when we don't know the full story. There's always multiple sides to one thing, and we all make mistakes. We see this all the time when we're on Instagram and we see something that's not factual, and you're like, oh my God. Like, and then it goes viral, and there's like all these people that like this post. And I'm like, and especially if it's like a Black history one, because we know like that's not, the fact is skewed. That's not the actual fact, but like so many people run with it because of the caption, and they're like, oh, this is amazing. And they like run off and they share it, and it's not accurate. And I felt like that's what happened with this situation. So we can be our own worst enemy, which is a different conversation.